Welcome back to my belated annual Oscar series where I talk about all the Oscar categories except for the short film ones. I rank all the nominees per category according to who I think deserves to win the Oscar, then I make a prediction for who I think will win that Oscar. But of course, right now I'm talking about the categories from last year. We are down to our last two from the 88th Annual Academy Awards. This Monday or tomorrow, by the time I'm filming this, I'm going to start making videos for the 2017 Oscars. But for now, we will talk about Best Director, and the nominees are Lenny Abrahamson for Room, Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu for The Revenant, Tom McCarthy for Spotlight, Adam McKay for The Big Short, and George Miller for Mad Max Fury Road. Now this is a very strong list of nominees in my opinion. All of them really are skilled and did bring something unique to each of their films. But that's what makes Best Director a pretty tough category for me to judge, because direction, in my opinion, is all about fitting a certain style and a tone to a movie. And so you can't really say one film is straight up better directed than another unless they're like, you know, the same genre, the same sort of setting and whatnot. So this is completely subjective once again. Anyway, in terms of who I think deserved to win the Oscar, at 5th place I'm going to give it to Adam McKay for The Big Short. Now Adam McKay certainly didn't do a bad job for The Big Short. In fact, the fact that none of the film is boring, even if it deals with what seems to be a really boring topic on the surface, which is the financial crisis, he really brings a lot of wit to the proceedings, and the emotional climax of The Big Short is so surprisingly poignant, but it fits with what the movie's trying to do, and he pulls that off. The reason why he's at 5th place here for me is that his technique is just a bit too scattershot. Like there's a lot of humor in The Big Short, but the way he kind of dispenses humor is done in ways that are sometimes not very consistent, and in ways that don't seem to add all the time to the big picture. That's why he's at number 5. Now at 4th place, I'm giving it to Lenny Abrahamson for Room. Now I have just no problem with Lenny Abrahamson's direction in this movie. In fact, his direction is one of the reasons why I love Room so much. So from this point forward, it's really just, you know, subjective taste. I just feel like the other three directors who I haven't mentioned yet just went really above and beyond the Call of Duty. But for what Lenny Abrahamson did for Room, you really have to give him major kudos, because he kept the room itself, the location in the first half of the film, he kept it from feeling claustrophobic. You know, you really saw it through the eyes of Jacob Tremblay's character, Jack, which is something that Emma Donoghue did in her book, but I actually feel like Lenny Abrahamson put us in his point of view better than she did. There are moments of pure, just white-knuckle intensity in the film that really work. There are moments, especially in the second half, of just raw emotion that'll really get you. And if there's really any sort of negative I can come up with, it's that the first half really is more interesting than the second half, although that is more of a writing thing than a directing thing, I guess. Now at 3rd place, I'm going to give it to Tom McCarthy for Spotlight. And what McCarthy does for this movie, I think, is so underrated. What he does is that he plays this movie incredibly straight. He restrains himself from adding even the slightest bit of overblown drama. Like, the music never really rises above the characters' voice levels. There are no really flashy touches to the drama that's happening. And for a movie like this, I think you needed an approach like this, because you're dealing with characters who are investigative journalists who take their jobs very seriously, and when they're working, it's just pure work. They can't really afford to have any emotion seep in there. So he really firmly places us into the character's mindset. He does this through really slow and steady camera pans, really subtle movement with his camera, and he just turns this story, which, you know, on the surface could be like this huge epic thing about priests molesting kids, and it becomes a really intimate story about journalism. Now at 2nd place, I'm going to give it to Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu for The Revenant, and there's no denying that Iñárritu is just a mega talented director. We already knew that from Birdman, and if you're a fan of his previous films, then from there. But Birdman really put him on the map, and The Revenant showed that he wasn't just a one-trick pony. What he does with his camera in this movie is just, he becomes so involved with the characters. Like, the camera goes down and dirty with Leonardo DiCaprio and the other characters, and you just feel their pain, you feel how cold they are. He manages to pull off this really bleak tone, but it's really cold at the same time, like I mentioned, and it's just, it puts you there. And for a movie that takes place like hundreds of years ago, it's a period piece, like that's hard to pull off sometimes. But of course the main attraction in terms of direction in The Revenant are these unbelievably long takes that Iñárritu has that are just populated by insane action that to this day I don't know how they orchestrated all of this stuff. I don't know how they choreographed everything, because there are people up in the trees. The bear sequence, like I don't know how they pulled that off. It is just so visceral, and yet it's so watchable. Like it's so compelling, even if Inarritu doesn't really have that much dialogue to work with. In fact, the film is at its most compelling when it's just images. And I do have an issue with how The Revenant can be a bit pretentious in my opinion, but I think it's more an issue with the writing than the directing, because given what he had to work with, I think Inarritu did a fantastic job. But you know who did all of those things that I just mentioned even better? That would be my number one, the guy who I think deserved to win the Oscar, George Miller for Mad Max Fury Road. Like, man, this guy was 70 years old when Fury Road came out. He was fresh off Happy Feet and Happy Feet 2. And just what he did here was like, it was like you're watching, you know, old school George Miller, and it was like he had never aged. Like, Mad Max Fury Road is the best directed action film I think ever made since maybe The Dark Knight. There is so much incredible visual world building in Fury Road. You get so much information just through the images that George Miller decides to put together. Even when the film is in motion, which is pretty much the entire film, you're still getting so much information that is so coherent. And in an age where people have seemed to forgotten how to shoot action movies, the action in this movie is shot so cleanly, but at the same time it has that brutal edge. It's so kinetic. It really earns its R rating, but it never feels overindulgent. You know, it knows when to show us gory stuff. It makes every sort of punch matter. Every moment in each chase scene, each fight scene feels important, feels like it's there for a structural reason. And perhaps most impressively, what George Miller does is that he balances this real sense of fun in the movie with a palpable sense of bleakness and horror almost. And getting that right is tough to do, and George Miller hit it out of the ballpark. Of course, the Academy ended up giving the Oscar to Alejandro González Iñárritu, but I really put all my chips into George Miller. He was my official prediction as well. I just felt that what he had accomplished was too much to ignore, and I just felt that, you know, they already gave Iñárritu an Oscar for Birdman, and I felt that the Academy would love a comeback story, but they obviously didn't feel that way, but that's okay. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Best Director. What do you guys think of these nominees? Who do you think deserved to win? Who do you think was going to win? Whatever you guys think, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.